Welcome everyone to another video. I have been pulled out of what was a semi-political video retirement. I wasn't going to make political videos anymore. At least I didn't feel the urge to, for many different reasons. One of the reasons is because the situation in the world just seems like it is too obvious for people not to recognize on their own what's going on. But something unfolded that was just so spectacularly obvious, it really needs to be put out there for everybody to see. And also there's quite an entertainment value here. Now, I have Robbie Barwick with me, who many of you will remember. We've done a few episodes before. But now he's a very different Robbie Barwick, because now he is he abuses the human rights of human rights abusers. And well, you know what? This will require a little bit of setting up. Let's just read a few of the things that some of the people are saying about you here. So we've got, first of all, Sophie McNeil said, very disappointing that Vicky Shu's observation was then quickly followed by an audience member who came along tonight with the sole intent of harassing her and causing trouble. That was you, Robbie. And Kevin chimed in and said he has to say male Chinese dissidents living overseas rarely get harassed the way that Vicky Shu did or does. And don't tell me that misogyny isn't a part of it here. All right, there's another name we can add to your list there, Robbie. Yep. And then we have another person that Vicky should feel unsafe speaking at a public event in Australia is not okay at all. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I'm 100% in support of Vicky's vigorous participation in Australia's debate. To the harassers and trolls out there, bugger off, dickheads. Okay, sorry about that. We got cut off there for a second. Anyways, so yeah, anyways, we get the picture. There's something very, very serious that obviously you did, which has everybody kind of up in arms. So we had an article even that came out. There was even a mainstream media journalist who came in from SBS News and said about you that you became quite agitated and stood up and started to walk towards her in a pretty confronting way. And so this is a quote from Leopold. And myself and Sophie McNeil from Human Rights Watch had to intervene. So now the issue here is, though, what you did was so terrible that they actually deleted the scene entirely from YouTube. They took it out of their video so that nobody else could see it. That's how terrible it was. Vicky obviously chimed in also and said that the events are interrupted, speakers are harassed and intimidated, including herself, are not feeling safe. Now, I guess everybody's probably really curious about what you did and what you said. So maybe, again, I know this is a little bit of a long setup, but let's watch the video that was so terrible that it was censored off of their video, and everybody had to take their word for it, that you were a very menacing character. Let's give it a look.
Two questions for Vicky. The first is on the effectiveness of your Uyghurs for Sale report. Can you identify manufacturing companies that have stopped using Uyghur labour because of your report?
Maybe the speaker goes up to work.
First of all, I would like to point out that last year during one of my trips to Melbourne to record Q&A, I ran into Robert at the airport, and in my opinion, I was ambushed, and he misrepresented our exchange on Twitter, and he accused me of wanting war with China. So I do not consider Robert to be here in good faith, and I refuse to answer his questions.
Oh, give me a break. I did not read the tweet. Excuse me. Read the tweet. I did not accuse you of that. I reported. I said I don't want war with China. I just quoted you saying I'm at war with China. I did not quote you saying anything else. You can see the tweet online.
So you can see, I'm just going to pause this for 1 second. The tweet is there. She obviously was trying to come up with something to avoid answering the question. And she obviously had to rely on a lie. And I want everybody to note that this is where you stopped. You didn't get any closer. They didn't give you the microphone back. So you stood in the middle to speak, and you're standing there. Now let's see who approaches who as we continue this video.
You asked
No.
question.
I asked the question. I'd like an answer. Instead, I got
That's the answer.
Sorry,
you asked the question on please
This is
sit down or
censorship.
leave.
You speak.
It is censorship. For those who are interested, I've brought along 10 copies of Jacqueline James' legal analysis of the Uyghurs for Sale report. And if you're interested, she debunks it completely and thoroughly.
You're an apologist for genocide. Get out.
And you're censoring.
I am not an apologist for genocide. This is a joke. Raising the living standards of people is not... Excuse me?
Sit down.
No, I'm not going to sit down. I've been attacked.
Excuse me.
Anyway, you said your name.
Censoring you.
Please either sit down or we'll get to leave the room.
You've had your moment, and Jack had her moment on Monday in Canberra, and he's been heard, and we'd like to ask you to
Well,
leave, please.
I'd like... No, we'd like a response. You
Target
are
and
troublemaking in international affairs.
I'll point out that
Everything-
Robert, you have potentially stalked me before, and
Excuse...
I'd like to ask you to leave, please.
For the record,
Oh, who's approaching?
I was at the taxi rank next to Vicky at Melbourne Airport. I didn't stalk her, I didn't follow her, I recognised her and I asked her a question.
and I'm running to you again here today with 10
I have
copies.
come to ask you this question, Vicky.
We have other questions.
That's not stalking, this is a public event.
And I refuse to answer your questions because I do not consider them to be a good faith.
Please leave.
And I do not
Would-
enjoy...
Before I leave, would anyone like a copy of this report?
Please leave the room.
Hold your hand up if you would like a copy of this report.
We read it. It's nonsense. We'll pick it up when we wanted.
That's it. That's what the fuss was about. A
Hang on.
question.
I have to accuse you of censorship now, Dan. You've left off the jewel at the end where I'm called a drama queen.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's right. You know what's interesting? Before you start explaining, I was the one who subtitled that video, as you know, and when it got a lot of traction because people realized how disconnected it was from what people were saying. And they didn't want people to see that. Now, Twitter has a partnership with ASPI for various things. Yes. And when people started sharing my tweet, this is how it showed up for everybody. This tweet is unavailable. They weren't even letting people see this. I don't know if you noticed that. But anyways, why don't you tell us a little bit about how things unfolded and very importantly, too, the implications of the question you were asking. That was a completely valid question. So walk us through a little bit about how this whole thing happened.
All right. Well, Jacqueline James has written a report on debunking the Uyghurs for Sale report, which was written by ASPI, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, in 2020. And Vicky Hsu is the lead author of that ASPI report. And I wanted to show this early, Daniel, if I can just share my screen for briefly. And
actually, while we're doing that, while I look for the request to come up, maybe get into explaining where that was exactly for people who aren't aware. ASPI, we're making the assumption everybody knows what it is. It's a think tank in Australia that's funded by weapons manufacturers in the U.S. State Department.
Well, it's actually majority funded by the Australian government, so it's the Australian taxpayer. And Jacqueline James and I are Australian citizens, and we are concerned that something that we fund as taxpayers is producing false information. On top of that's why it's called the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. It's funded by the Defence Department. On top of that, the more extraordinary part of its funding is it takes a massive amount of funding from the United States State Department, as well as money from the British government, the Japanese government, and then a lot of weapons manufacturers fund it as well. And actually, it's based in Canberra, the capital city of Australia. And Canberra is a city that when you fly into Canberra in the airport, you see these big billboards for weapons manufacturers, right? There's a lot of influence from those interests in that town. ASPI is their main propaganda. We call it a propaganda outlet, and I use that term deliberately. Our organisation, which is what I want to show in a second, my party, the Citizens Party, we're a political party. We have been debunking ASPI claims going back at least to 2016 and even earlier. But I say 2016 because that's when it really started to ramp up. And you and I talked before on a previous discussion we had about one of the more ridiculous claims it made was in 2016. We did a census, the 5-yearly census, but for the first time did it online. And the system failed. And straight away, ASPI came out and blamed China. Oh, we were hacked by China. We were hacked by China. And 2 weeks later, it was acknowledged that no, a modem hadn't been turned on. But this is how it operates. That has zero rigor. It is the least professional research organization on the planet. I could not have greater contempt for them than I'm trying to express now. These people are pathetic in the extreme. They only get that. There's only two reasons they have traction. There seem to be a professional outfit backed by the Australian government, and they have created the climate of McCarthyism, which is McCarthyism is all about prejudice. And the prejudice that they have incited in Australia and around the world induces people to accept their claims without question. So this was an article. What you're seeing here is from our website. We wrote this in our publication. One of our researchers wrote it in October 2020, just after Vicky Shu's ASPI report came out. Our researcher went through it and said, they make all these claims. You check their own footnotes and their own sources, and they have deliberately interpreted all those things in extreme bad faith, completely misrepresented in many cases what those sources are, etc. Right? That was a week's work by one researcher in our office in 2020. So in early 2021, I met Jack James, and Jack hadn't done her report then, and we were discussing this Uyghurs for Sale report, and I showed Jack what our researcher had done. But then Jack went and did this incredible body of work. Just an Australian citizen who has, because she worked in China and has a connection to China and a strong sense that there was no proof for these claims. Jack went and did a legal analysis of the Uyghurs for Sale report to say you're alleging forced labor, which is a crime under international law, but it's defined. Does what you're alleging meet the definition of what you're saying? And you've read the report. A lot of people read the report. It is devastating. She just shows in page after page after page it doesn't meet the legal definition. And then she goes and does something even more thorough than we did in our one-page article, which was just go through case after case after case of what they cited and said, this is misrepresented, this is misrepresented, this is misrepresented. And it's absolutely devastating. The thing is, though, that Jack produced that last year, or earlier this year. And of course, we've had this 2-year pandemic, and there's been no real public events process whereby you could go and participate in these ASPI events. So now ASPI has started holding events again. So that was what you just saw in that video was, it's now the 25th of August. So it was the 17th of August, Wednesday night here in Melbourne. I'm in Melbourne. And on the Monday night, Jacqueline James had gone to an ASPI event in Canberra to ask her own variation of questions based on her report. My question was strategic. And might I say, it's the only reason there's film, the only reason there's video, because I did not repeatedly interrupt Vicky, as the mainstream media article that came out last night said, and misrepresented me as having done. I had one question, and that question was, I wanted to see if Vicky Shu would take credit for her report having cost Uyghurs their jobs because multinational manufacturers had withdrawn from supply chains that use Uyghur labor. That's what I wanted to see if she was prepared to do. Because if she was, we wanted that answer on video, so that could be the basis, that could contribute to a lawsuit. Because Jack James is working on a lawsuit on behalf of Uyghurs. That's why it was being filmed, and that's why I asked that question. There was no other reason to be there, right? But she's attending a public meeting. I went through all the proper channels to register for the public meeting in my proper name, etc. And then you saw what happened. And I must say, since then, as you know, it was clearly in their entourage, because there's just been this blizzard of personal attacks, smears against me and against Jack James, but especially against me because I'm the largish man who could be, characterized as somehow threatening,
misogynistic, and use all these words
to this young Chinese woman, and turn that into a bad look. And all I can say is, thank God my associate was there to film it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's absolutely perfect. Well, first of all, I want to say the basis for that question, too, is that there were factories that actually were sending Uyghur workers home because it just wasn't worth the risk.
Yeah.
All you need is a picture of a Uyghur in a factory, and that's enough to scream forced labor.
Yeah.
Like as if there's no possible way that Uyghurs could legitimately be working jobs. And I can actually demonstrate that. I can demonstrate that really carefully. Now, Darren Byler is connected to this group as well, right?
Oh, yeah. He's in their orbit of experts. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. I think was he one of the peer reviewers also? I think he was one of the peer reviewers for the original forced labor report.
He probably testified to the Australian Senate about the report as well, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah. Now, let me show you his threshold for evidence. This is his own tweet. He ripped down a video off of TikTok of a Uyghur worker in a factory making shoes on a factory line, looking like a boss while he's obviously set his own camera phone up because it's shaking while he's on the production line. And this was enough for him to say, looks like there's a forced labor problem. No other evidence. Let me show you that. Hey, Gabriel Valim! I put that arrow there because he cut the Douyin ID out, so you couldn't find this chap's original account and see he's probably got videos with his family and everything like that. Because that's what they used to do. They would constantly, these propagandists would share these videos, and then people would look up the original Douyin video and say, what are you talking about? So the interesting additional thing here is that he says, looks like Skechers should look into this. Skechers actually did. After this tweet was sent, and I don't know if it had anything to do with this tweet specifically, Skechers went in and made unannounced visits to the factories implicated in their reports and did a deep audit and found nothing to support it. Now, Darren never, ever once engaged with that report. Even if he didn't believe it, they gave him what he wanted. And he could have at least said, Skechers investigated, but I find I don't believe their report for whatever reason. He could have done that, but he didn't even do this. What unfolded?
Jack highlighted that about the ASPI report, that they did not acknowledge the denials from the companies that were named in that report, who went and did their own due diligence, and companies like Apple. Hello, Apple, right? They accused Apple of using forced labor, and when and Apple has addressed it. And the ASPI report did not even acknowledge that Apple had made a comment about it.
Yeah, that's right. And what unfolded in this event, the way that they do things, it's perfect to show the question you asked, how they deleted it from their video, and how they misrepresented it, because it's a perfect example of what they do in their reports. This is what they do. They misrepresent the claim. Also about the taxi stand, when it was, you told that story on my channel, like a year or 2 years ago, whatever it was. I think it's worth it to play that video, because she has never, ever spoken about that incident before. And it's not like she's not vocal against her critics and willing to say things, because if you remember, this is this is what she had to say to you before. This is and this was when you were calling out a very distasteful tweet where she was comparing a so-called genocide against the Uyghurs with her ex-boyfriend not returning a book or something like that. It was like really insensitive.
I was taking issue with the particular language that she chose to use. I mean, she's a younger person than me. She puts her personal life online, etc. It's just that because of the language was the sort of extreme language that I was seeing coming out of ASPI about so-called Uyghur genocide. I just said something, and then I got that response. And it's because I got that response that I was even interested in saying hello to her when I recognized her in the plane that I was on that day. And I thought, well, I'm the stupid old bald beep, but then I decided against it. I mean, you can play the clip from the previous.
Yeah, let's play, because your story has always remained consistent. And if you really did harass her, there's no way she wouldn't have said that before.
Back to Melbourne, and who's on my plane? But that girl with no hair, Vicky Shue. She was on my plane, and I'm sending messages to people. Oh, Vicky Shue's on my plane. Should I talk to her? Now, one wise person said, No. She'll interpret that as some kind of aggression, etc. Someone else, a woman, said, "No, you should." Right. So I took her anyway. I decided I wasn't going to talk to her in the plane, because you can't escape in a plane, so that could be a bit aggressive.
Yeah, that's a good call.
But I got out of the plane, went to catch a cab. There was no one at the airport because it's in COVID conditions. Went to catch a cab. I'm the only one standing there at the taxi rank, and I'm waiting for a cab to come. And who should come and stand right beside me? Is Vicky Shue. And I'm thinking, I got to say something. And I introduced myself. I said, oh, I'm Robbie Barwick. Remember me? And she goes, I said, I'm the guy on Twitter you called the fat old bald fuck. And she goes, oh. She did remember then. And I said to her, you do understand why people like me are alarmed at where this is going, right? We don't want a war on China, a war with China. And she said straight away, I'm already at war with China. And I said, no, we don't want a real war with China. And she insisted, no, I'm in a real war with China. And I realized our CADs came at that point, and I just
there's nothing there, nothing of substance there.
You mean you've told that story many times, right?
And let me add. The last thing I said to her was "Good luck tonight" on Q&A, this TV show that she referenced in the video, the first video you played last week. That she'd come down for this TV show. So it's a weekly political panel talk show, right? And she'd come down to talk about what? The harassment she had received as a Chinese dissident. That's what she'd come to talk about. That's what she took. That the night after that. My talking to her at the airport that night, she was on TV talking about being harassed as a Chinese dissident. Guess what? She didn't mention this supposed ambush of her that day at the airport.
Yeah, right? And she's very keen to talk about all the harassment that she had before.
Yep.
But she left this one out, and it only came out when she needed an excuse to not answer your question, which would have had massive implications for her. And in the process, got caught red-handed, needing to lie to further use this point, misrepresenting what you actually even tweeted to begin with.
Yeah. And now being assisted by the mainstream media to misrepresent the second exchange with her, which, like I said, thank God I was filming, or my associate was filming, because if you read the article that came out last night, it makes me seem like this menacing person charging up into her, and James Leibold and Sophie McNeil had to stand in the way and intervene and call security when people could see what happened themselves. If it wasn't being filmed, she'd be misrepresenting that as well. All I can say is, by any definition, if you're at a taxi rank first, and you're just standing there, and she has to come up to me. Now, she didn't come up to me to talk to me, of course, but there was only two of us there, and I had wanted to say something, so I took the opportunity.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if we can see the threshold for what is called harassment at that event, because now they removed that clip in order to represent that as harassment, and it's far from the truth. So you only need to imagine. I want to get into how the mainstream media kind of backup singers came to their rescue also to try to spin this in terms of the article that was written about you. But I want to take a quick moment to say that a lot of people have a difficult time understanding what is the connection between the military-industrial complex and funding a think tank that just says bad things about China. Well, the whole ecosystem, the whole point about ramping up aggressions, it requires this kind of thing. It requires dehumanizing an enemy. If Raytheon, which is one of the ASPI sponsors, really thought they were funding a think tank that would normalize relations between China and the West, do you think that they would be funding them? Of course they wouldn't be. The Raytheon CEO said in a conference call when somebody asked him about future profit potential that the tensions in the South China Sea is a profit potential. There's a video recording of that. I have it on my Twitter. I'll try to remember to put it in the description. This is how it all connects together. Now,
the road to war is paved with disinformation. And this is the machinery of disinformation.
So now I want to quickly mention, because this is kind of entertaining too, about this guy who wrote this article, Tom, what was his name? Tom
Canetti.
Okay, Tom Canetti, yeah. So he, a bunch of people asked him some questions, and he's blocked everybody, including the people he's written the article about.
Yeah.
But walk me through that. How did he contact you? What did he ask you? What was the conversation like? And what was revealed in that conversation?
It was a lengthy conversation, and I'll try and distill it as much as possible, because there's two things I want to highlight of the conversation, that clip that obviously he didn't put in the article, but that to me that's relevant. People can see. I'm going to talk about him. Given the way he's treated me, I'm going to talk about what I know about him. So he contacted me on Twitter direct message saying, hi, I'm writing an article on critics of Chinese dissidents in Australia. Given what happened on Wednesday night, can we talk? And I said, yes, fine, here, let's talk. So this was on Sunday. And we ended up talking for probably the better part of an hour, right? And I answered lots and lots of questions. I could tell by the way he was asking the questions, though, that on the one hand, he seemed a bit lightweight as a journalist. He's clearly not in the first line, the first rank of the anti-China journalists in Australia. He writes for SBS. Now, SBS is our multicultural broadcaster, and that was relevant as well. So there's an angle there why he's interested in the Chinese community. So I said at the beginning of that interview and the end of the interview, I said, I opened and closed with exactly the same message to him. I said, I'm not a critic of Chinese dissidents. I'm a critic of ASPI, because I don't have a position to criticize Chinese dissidents, right? I can't second guess their experience, whatever. That's not what I'm about. What I can do is say, this organization, ASPI, which is funded by my tax dollars, is not telling the truth. I can say that, right? So I was at pains to emphasize that. He then wanted to, he got my version of the events, which he only used in the most cursory way, my version. The real story, as he told the article, 2/3 of the article, as you saw, Daniel, is he doesn't even identify me for the first 2/3. This man approached Vicky Xu, etc. And then at the end, of the article, he goes, this man is Robert Barwick, right? And then he has some things from me. He wanted to know my connections to the Chinese government, and shoot me, I don't have any. And this of course, is a classic McCarthyite tactic. You must be funded by the Chinese government. We are not. And in fact, as a political party, this is one of the areas that I'm the strongest on. This is my strongest ground, because political parties are regulated in our country. Our funding is regulated. It's all audited, right? And so there's a threshold of $14,300 above which donations must be disclosed. But below that, donations aren't disclosed. Our party raises a fair amount of money, but it funds a lot of stuff. But we don't raise it from big business. We raise it from small donations from everyday Australians. And so most of those donations hardly ever get over that threshold. So they're not disclosed. And they take that to say, oh, see, they're hiding something. No, because the Electoral Commission comes in every few years and audits us, and they know exactly where that money is coming from. They can see it. We are in compliance with the law, right? When they say you must be funded by China, they're accusing us of a crime. So anyway, I told him all that. But here's the two things that blew me away about this particular journalist. The first was when he was trying to get me to prove there was no genocide in Xinjiang. And I was answering his questions, but I was trying to, eventually we got out of that little tussle, because my point was, it's not up for me to prove it or disprove it. I'm an Australian citizen in Australia. All I can tell you, Tom, is that ASPI hasn't proved it, that there is. That's our point, right? This report going around the world is not proof. Anyway, so, and then he thought he was on strong ground when he said, you know, have you talked to Uyghurs in Australia? And no, the answer is not. I've talked to other Uyghurs, but not Uyghurs in Australia. Oh, see, you're not sincere. Well, talking to Uyghurs in Australia doesn't prove it one or the other either. But anyway, what blew me away was he asked this question: what about the mass graves in Xinjiang? And my reaction was palpable. I said, do you understand what you've just done? You have assumed something that China's worst enemies haven't accused it of. Right. You think there must be mass graves in Xinjiang because ASPI uses the word genocide. Nobody accuses China of mass graves in Xinjiang. Where did you get this idea in your head? And he was embarrassed, right? Because he had this idea there must be mass graves in Xinjiang. And my ridicule and I was ridiculing ASPI. I said, look, your mindset, what you think is a result of ASPI's propaganda, right? This is my point, Tom. And I hope he's gone and actually done some Google searches and realized, yeah, there is no allegations of mass graves in Xinjiang. The second one, and this is nastier, and I want to raise it here now. This is the first time I'm going public with this. When he was asking about our fundraising, and I gave him that explanation, but in a lot more detail that I've just given you, he then jumped from us to Jack James because he wants to connect us with Jack James or connect Jack James with us. But Jack is not part of our party. She's completely independent. And he said, but Jack James raises money, and because Jack has a Patreon or a GoFundMe or something, might be a GoFundMe. Right. And he said, when you look at the list of people who've donated to her, they're all Chinese names. And I said, whoa, you're on dangerous ground, buddy. You work for the multicultural broadcaster. You know better than anybody how that can be twisted in this redneck, in a certain redneck climate in Australia, to make people, oh, because they're Chinese names, we should be suspicious of them. Ethnic communities, not just Chinese, ethnic communities in this country put up with that kind of prejudice and suspicion the whole history of Australia. That's why SBS exists, to break that down, to change that, to get people to understand that we're all Australians, right? I said, for all you know, every one of those Chinese names is an Australian citizen, more Australian than you or me. But your question assumes that they might be, because they're a Chinese name, there might be something to be suspicious about. That's not good. That's bad coming from you, because that's what his broadcast is. It's a state broadcaster, by the way, SBS. And right. I'll tell you what, that is a shocking thing. I've told certain people in ethnic communities that today, like on a one-on-one basis, they are shocked at the xenophobia inherent in that question. This is what they've been fighting against their whole life, that this would come from an SBS journalist, that question. And it's on tape. He recorded this interview. He played, there's a 6-minute clip on SBS of a version of the article, and you can hear my voice on that clip. He used some of the recording with me. So if he sees this, Tom Canetti, if you see this and you don't like what I'm saying about you and the xenophobia inherent in your question and you deny it, play the tape. You've got it on tape. Yep. I warned you on that tape. I warned him in a nice way. I cautioned him. You know this is bad overtones. I'm raising it now because of what it means, Daniel, that he, even someone who should be sensitive to this subject, has been conditioned by the McCarthyite climate in this country, and that's thanks to damn ASPI. And that's why I'm not taking a step backwards. Doesn't matter what they try and say about me and smear me. That's ASPI reflected through that particular journalist.
It really is so revealing in so many ways. The event itself and the follow-up, the types of questions this journalist was asking. And I mean, even if you wanted to think through it logically, I mean, Chinese Australians or Chinese in general are impacted by this kind of rhetoric, selling this idea that, you know, if it's Han Chinese people in China, they're sitting back and apparently watching their Uyghur brothers and sisters be genocided. And this is the type of country and people that belong there. It does have implications where it ramps up xenophobia. So it makes sense. But yeah, the insensitivity of that question to begin with. And the moment that he realized he was pushing the propaganda even further than the propagandists did, talking about mass graves, that should have been the moment where he took a step back and said, oh, shoot, hold on a second. Maybe I am really being led down the wrong path with this. The other thing is, when he published this claim from Mr. Leopold, talking about agitated, stood up and walked towards her in a confronting way, he could have verified himself. He could have watched the video and he would have said, well, hold on a second. That's not what happened. And if he didn't see the video because they removed it from the stream, that would also add questions. Well, hold on a second. Why did you remove this confrontation from the video? I mean, that would have been part of the basic due diligence involved, but you can see across the board.
Look, he has no excuse. He contacted me on Twitter. I posted the first version of that video on Twitter. It's still up there on my YouTube page. You then posted the second version on Twitter, and then I retweeted your version, right? He has to have seen the video. So not only did he clearly let Mr. Leibold misrepresent it, he did not link to the video in his article. This is the 21st century. You write online articles, you can link to the video. Right, yep. A lot of my ASPI related enemies, like Drew Pavlu, when they tweeted about the event on that Wednesday night, they didn't link to the video. They tweeted a screenshot.
Yep. They can't show it because it's so disconnected from what they're trying to sell. And then if that isn't enough of a display of what this journalist, quote unquote journalist, is all about. Jack actually was obviously contacted by him as well and answered all of his questions publicly. So, you know, there's some of the things here talking about, no, I'm not funded by the Chinese government. People can pause this video if they want to read the actual questions. I'm a private citizen, explains why she's doing it and everything like that. I also, this is before he wrote the article. I said that, you know, you've put Tom in an odd spot. The mainstream media would have been happy uncritically cheerleading for the military manufacturer funded think tanks, but are now forced to pretend to care about funding sources and go after the folks asking the obvious questions they've intentionally avoided. And that's the key is that let's wait. Let's forget for a moment. Even if he really believed he was true, that you guys are funded by the Chinese government. All right. Okay. So let's take an issue with funding. Let's go with this. What about the people who are making these claims? Who are they funded by? Now, one important distinction, though, is we don't go directly to that. I tweeted about this, and I'll just read the tweet directly. I said, for those of you following the saga, pay attention to a key difference between the sides. One engages with the questions and narratives put forward, then explores what motivates their dishonesty. The other jumps straight to conspiracy theories to excuse not engaging at the topic at hand. So now, he obviously put that article out. He didn't include any of Jack's responses. He didn't include any reference or link to her legal paper or anything like that, and just completely left it out. But still wrote about her, which is quite unusual because usually the New York Times or BBC, when they don't get what they want, and I've displayed this on my Twitter before, they just cut them out directly. So I had mentioned that. I mentioned to Tom, I said, some friendly advice to Tom. Experienced propagandists at the BBC and the New York Times typically drop a subject entirely rather than still write about them but refuse to include their responses. It's less blatant and somewhat easier to deny being an absolute stooge. Yeah, I already mentioned that. He wrote about the confrontation without verifying it. And so he obviously blocked me. And also he blocked everybody who liked my tweet.
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't.
I'm starting to wonder if there's a mainstream media handbook here because there's so many. I've seen this happen so many times. Someone in the mainstream media does something, people naturally respond on social media, mass blocking of all those people. And this one still surprised me. Even before I'd finished my tweet thread in response, he blocked me.
You know, yeah, I reached out to him. I sent him an email because I said we would be talking about him in this video. And I asked him a number of questions, and some of them were along the same lines that he thinks are legitimate questions, but I actually asked in a more honest way. So, for example, one of the questions was, you know, considering the level of neglect that seems to be involved in your report, I'd like to ask if you've been incentivized by ASPI or any other group to produce the article in question that you wrote for SBS News. Because I'm kind of half thinking that that level of ignorance that he's going ahead with and that he's content with, it doesn't seem organic. It seems like there must be some other reason why somebody would be this intentionally ignorant.
My sense from the interview is even though my exchange with him about the mass graves was fairly early on, and it didn't seem like, apart from being a bit embarrassed at that point of the interview, he then just continued on with his prepared line of questioning, and he was going through the motions somewhat because he had the endpoint in mind and then constructed the article accordingly. I also he according to his bio he reports on human rights related issues. Well, that's fine, but there's besides ASPI, there's two other organisations that Jack James has taken on in a subsequent report, and they were the people present on that night, last Wednesday night, and that's Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. And the thing is, they don't have the same reputation as ASPI, Daniel, because we've really highlighted it's not as naked and blatant with them. They don't have funding by arms manufacturers, etc. That said, they're a lot more sophisticated. They do have deep links to the U.S. intelligence community, and the Anglo-American intelligence community, which further that strategic agenda. And I just want to highlight a couple of quotes on that. Right, Human Rights Watch was originally formed in 1978 as Helsinki Rights Watch, co-founded by Arya Nair, former president of George Soros's Open Society Foundation. If you know George, there's a lot of, forget the Trump stuff about George Soros. George Soros has a long-standing history funding regime change operations. But in 2014, a whole bunch of genuine human rights people put out an open letter to Human Rights Watch calling for it to cut off its links to the US government. They said, quote, close its revolving door to the US government, stating the organization's close ties to the US government call its independence into question. And they talked about, things to do with the CIA, National Endowment for Democracy, etc. And as for Amnesty International, it was a similar thing. It was in the 60s. It's an older organization. It was founded by a British intelligence guy they had to reorganize it after people were saying, hang on, this is funded by the British Foreign Office. And all they did was disguise that sort of stuff. But similar way the National Endowment for Democracy was started to disguise the CIA's operation. A former British ambassador to Syria, Peter Ford, said of Amnesty International in 2017, he denounced it as the, quote, vanguard of liberal interventionism. They have become part of the liberal elite establishment. This is the new way of picking up the white man's burden. You go around changing regimes that you accuse of human rights. And in other words, there's a fakeness to this human rights agenda that they're pushing. Right. And the real the real proof of that was the famous Tillerson Memo, which actually let me share my screen again here if you don't mind.
Yeah, I didn't actually successfully share your screen last time. I shared it from my own one.
Okay. I'll give you this one. Let me just read it out. This is the last paragraph. In 2017, Rex Tillerson becomes Secretary of State. The State Department, which funds ASPI, wrote a memo for him on human rights. This is the last paragraph. One useful guideline for a realistic and successful foreign policy is that allies should be treated differently and better than adversaries. Otherwise, we end up with more adversaries and fewer allies. The classic dilemma of balancing ideals and interests is with regard to America's allies. In relation to our competitors, there is far less of a dilemma. We do not look to bolster America's adversaries overseas. We look to pressure, compete with, and outmaneuver them. For this reason, we should consider human rights as an important issue in regard to US relations with China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And this is not only because of moral concern for practices inside those countries. It is also because pressing those regimes on human rights is one way to impose costs, apply counter pressure, and regain the initiative from them strategically. It's in black and white. They are not sincere one iota. And yet they use this as a massive sledgehammer, and everyone is too scared to call it out except for a few people.
Yeah, and the proof is in the pudding too. Like we don't have to just talk about what the potential consequences are, that they could push misinformation. Amnesty was integral to pushing Naira's fake incubator baby story in order to excuse war. You know, Human Rights Watch, now they do things like, I believe Human Rights Watch has, well, there have been people who have been critical about them because they have something called a revolving door policy. You have a lot of people going through US government, through Human Rights Watch, and vice versa, round and around. Now they are willing to do things like call, you know, George Bush a war criminal. I believe Human Rights has done that before, but I think that they know that it's important to do that once in a while, because part of the virtue signaling that comes from people in the West is they can say, well, at least we can criticize our government, or we can do these things.
But it's cheap after the event.
Yeah, it's after the event, but also the consequences that come from these reports are very different. Nothing will ever happen to George Bush if Human Rights Watch calls him a war criminal. But when Human Rights Watch puts out these reports saying, oh, this is going on over here, they're actually used as a foundation for real sanctions. Sanctions, but that, by the way, affect the people on the ground that they're supposedly trying to help.
So, look, in conclusion, I want people to read the Jack James report. That's what they're afraid of, right? That's why they're trying to smear Jack for writing it, me for being someone who's prepared to amplify it, and people need to do that. That's the bottom line. You can
absolutely.
If you want our history, go to our citizensparty.org.au website, and you'll see all the stuff we've written about ASPI over the years. And that's been, you know, we've had a consistent position, but this is a key. The US State Department has just produced a report on exactly what we're doing now. You might know, like that people, the Chinese government is running this massive disinformation agenda to get people off the scent of the Xinjiang genocide, something like that, right? They like producing this kind of stuff because, you know, make people think about the process rather than the facts, right? Change the subject onto what's China doing in the information war versus what's America doing in the information war. No, there's facts there, and we've analysed their facts. Jack has analysed their facts in a fundamental way. Watch that. Read that report.
Yeah. Okay, Robbie, I know you've got to go now, so let's end on that. I'm going to summarize a few other points here that people need to pay attention to when they go through this. I'm going to leave some links to your stuff, to Jack James's report, and we'll catch up with you next time.
Thank you. And thanks for the
work.
Thanks
for joining.
All right. See you.
Well, everyone, I hope that you found that conversation with Robbie Barwick enlightening, or at least entertaining if you're already well aware what these propagandists are all about. I just wanted to add a few final points onto Robbie's final point. The most important being, when you do finally look into these claims that they're putting out, and you do see that it's not adding up, or that stories aren't being represented in an honest way, pay attention to what happens when you ask the most basic, logical, honest questions thereafter. Look at how quickly you'll be called a troll or a CCP shill or whatever it is these propagandists are calling people these days who dare question their work. I can give you a direct example of how low that threshold is to get yourself on their list of trolls. Robert Potter is somebody who's connected to this ASPI circle, also heavily connected to the US State Department. He's trying to take his company public, and he usually spends his time online drawing convoluted flowcharts to do everything except address the actual topic at hand. And this was no exception when people came out and said, hold on a second, that conversation between Robbie and Vicky didn't happen like you guys are saying. Anybody who dared even say that was labeled a troll. And luckily, Robert put on the right examples of trolling. If we zoom into one of them, we can see that he included Kurt, who asked genuine question, James, do you believe Robbie's actions were threatening? Because, of course, anybody who saw the video that these people are trying so desperately to hide from everybody would know it was not threatening. But this simple question is what got Kurt on the list of trolls. When Kurt saw this, he asked a question, or excuse me, how is my tweet on the right, second pick, trolling? It is a question to this person in response to a tweet he put out about the situation with Vicky and Robbie, in which he tagged her, so she was automatically tagged. You've grossly misrepresented me here. There is no possible way to respond to this without conceding that, okay, this is an issue, but they know it's an issue when they put it out. They know that they're being dishonest, so the only thing that they can do is block. They don't like answering questions because they know exactly what they're doing. Now, I will say, though, to ASPI's credit, they did allow Jack to ask a question in another event that wasn't too long ago. And it's very revealing, though. When they do actually answer and you do manage to get them to speak, you finally start to realize the implications of what they're saying and why they probably opt to stay quiet most of the time. So this, Jack James, the person who wrote those legal analysis reports that Robbie and I were talking about, asked a question about ASPI's work because they were constantly painting China as criticizing or attacking or having a war on Islam in general, rather than the truth of going after people who misuse religion to mistreat others. Now, what she did was she asked about an example, a very important example that was left out. You know what? I won't say too much. Let's watch the video together first, and I will unpack it for you afterwards.
From a reference in the Readers for Sale report, but the story was excluded from the ASPI report. Thank you very much. It's a story of a Xinjiang Muslim child bride called Misbah al-Guri. She was pulled out of school by her parents and married off at the age of 15 to a 55-year-old wild imam to become his seventh wife. The husband would punch and kick her, not let her go to hospital because it was not halal, force her to cover her face and indoctrinate her with extremist ideas, which included viewing women as appendages of men. Where is Human Rights Watch and where is ASPI to protect this woman's human rights, social rights, economic rights, all of her rights? Where are you? I'm hearing silence.
Can I just take that one, since I personally worked on that report? The thing with Xinjiang is that what that source is probably a government-backed state media outlet. And what they have been doing for decades now is just kind of hyping up these stories about Muslims in the region being backwards and mistreating women. And I'm not saying this is fake. Don't put words in my mouth, please.
Jack, again, Daria gave you the very, very strong courtesy of allowing you to ask the question. I've actually extended time to allow you to ask the question. Allow her to answer. And we can talk about it offline as well.
So it is difficult to verify. If you can verify that claim, I would be very happy to read it. But you know, it is not what we were reporting on at the time. Plus, it was not verifiable, so we did not include it in our report.
That is a basic question that Jack James asked that the mainstream media should be asking if they really wanted to critically examine what was being said, and or at least at bare minimum do their due diligence. But what it revealed was that they were happy to say that China was having a war on Islam, but they were not happy to include the examples of the things that they were specifically going after. Probably because if they included that example, people know that there is a global precedent for an issue with child brides. And actually, Jack James has a very good authority to speak on this topic, but that's due to personal connections that she'll probably speak about on her own in the future. But that's a very logical and important thing to go after. But what's more interesting is that they didn't want to include the story because it was a Chinese government claim. They have no problem using Chinese government data when it tells the story that they want it to tell, or when they want to tell only half of the story. If you want to tell this story, you can't only tell half of it. At bare minimum, you'll say, this is an example of what China says they're fighting, but we reject it because of this and this and this reason. At least put it out there for people to say that there's a context here, or there's a supposed context, and feel free to disagree with it. So what they do is they cherry pick, because they very often are quite proud when they say, oh, we got this data right from the Chinese government, when they're presenting something that, when taken out of context, tells the story that they would like it to tell. So this is what happens when you ask the questions. Sometimes it ends up a little bit more ridiculous when they, you know, obviously do the less advisable thing as a propagandist and just decide to stay silent. And I want to show you a pretty entertaining example of that. A conversation that Carl Zhao had with Lyman Stone, who's also connected to this kind of a circle. I think he's based in Canada, explaining how he knows that there's Uyghur slave labor. Let's take a look at that video.
So if we want to talk about the selling of unfree labor, this is well documented. It is easy to find. You can purchase unfree labor. It is advertised with military surveillance. You can look it up. You can find it today.
You just made a claim that you say you can go to Taobao today. You can purchase a Uyghur slave. So I challenge you right now. Open up your browser, go to Taobao, and show me where you can purchase a Uyghur slave.
Unfortunately, I can't do Chinese characters on my keyboard.
So let's back up your claim right now. This is your chance.
It's probably not actually Taobao.
Okay, like I can see the Chinese, and I can verify that at least this says what it says. It says we provide a lot of government-sponsored workers dispatching from Xinjiang. Right. This is a different from your claim that you can go to Taobao and order a Uyghur slave. Right.
Do you think these people have a choice in going?
We can actually talk about this, because this Chinese
organized. Do you think these people have a choice in this? Do you think those workers got a choice in where they went? You know what? Here's the funny thing. I've met some of them. They didn't have a choice.
You met some of them?
Yes.
Where? In Canada?
That would be an interesting thing for me to say.
How did you meet them in Canada? I'm just curious, because if they're on free labor in China, how did you meet them in Canada?
I can say that I have met someone who was who did not have their labor expropriated from them as a result of their choice.
So how did they end up in Canada?
I'm not saying they were in Canada.
Okay,
but
so
for their own safety, I can't really give.
So you are saying you are in contact with a Uyghur in China who is working in the slave factories?
No.
Okay. Okay. So right now I just have to take
you can Google plenty of firsthand accounts.
All right, Google. So now Lyman Stone apparently said the next day that he was tired and he misspoke, but he maintained that it was easy for companies in China to acquire Uyghur slave labor. So on Twitter afterwards, I followed up with him and his team, and I said, listen, I own a company in China. We can do a joint investigation together. You tell me step by step how to hire a Uyghur slave laborer, and I'll document the entire thing. I'll expose the entire thing on my YouTube channel. And of course, they blocked me because they can't actually support the things that they say. This is a reoccurring issue with these people, and I think that even if you want to believe these claims about what's going on in Xinjiang, if your threshold is lower and you don't believe that to throw out such a strong word like genocide, that you need to be really sure of yourself, and you need to make sure that you did the due diligence before you use such a strong word, especially when you consider what this narrative could be excused to accomplish in terms of ramping up conflicts, fine. But there's one thing you can't deny. What we uncovered today is how dishonest these people operate. When they were pouring out these accusations against the harassment that supposedly happened from Robbie, not only did they not include the actual example of that harassment, it would be very, very easy to attach a short video clip and say, look at this. This is what we're talking about. No, not only did they not include it, but on their full video on their YouTube channel, they completely cut that segment out so that even if somebody wanted to verify what they were saying, they wouldn't be able to. They wouldn't be able to go to their channel and say, whoa, yeah, that's really what happened. Because, of course, that's not what would happen. They'd say, hang on a second, this is completely different from what you are saying. Vicky Xu, obviously, in that event, caught red-handed lying about what Robbie tweeted, saying that she wanted war with China when he, in fact, did not say that in his tweet, using as an excuse to avoid answering his question, was also very blatant. And perhaps one of the most blatant things is when their support crew of mainstream media journalists came up, Tom Canetti in particular, and when he started posting the accused harassment uncritically, either without checking the video first to say, hang on a sec, that's not what happened, or having more likely seen the video and say, yeah, I'm going to help them misrepresent it as harassment when it clearly was not, was also very blatant. Not including any of Jack's responses was also very blatant. Blocking her from being able to respond on his tweets advertising his article. Removing her right to reply was also very blatant. Not including a link or even any mention of her legal analysis that she did, completely ripping apart ASPI's claim, was also completely blatant. And he should also be very, very ashamed of himself for questioning the legitimacy of people with Chinese-sounding names. As a supposed human rights activist or somebody who focuses on this, it's quite shocking to hear that you did that, Tom, and I think you should be very ashamed of yourself. Those are a number of things that cannot be denied at all here. So at bare minimum, if you want to believe the propagandists, fine, but there's absolutely nothing you can do to say that these people engage in good faith or that they're honest people. I'm going to leave it here. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going on. I didn't think I was going to make any more political videos, but I just had to show this to you guys. And wherever my next video takes me, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.